Hello from Lake Forest. As some of you may know, we've held this session a number of times in the last few years at Rolling Meadows High School, and I really wish we could be there together today. Um, each year I look forward to coming back and presenting this information to District 214, but in spite of things the way they are, I hope this information session will be helpful to you and your family as you begin to navigate the college admission and financial aid process. Just a little bit about myself. This is my 25th year at Lake Forest. I served at college in Nebraska for about 9 years before that in both admissions and financial aid. My wife and I live in Arlington Heights. We've got 6 daughters. 3 of those have graduated from Hersey High School, and we have a 6th grader at Thomas Middle School, a 4th and a 2nd grader at Olive Elementary School. So with that little bit of introduction, let's go ahead and dive into financial aid. In doing so, what's going to happen is my image will appear in the upper right portion of your screen in a small image, and the slides that we'll present will take over a majority of your screen. To begin with, let's look at the topics we're going to cover today. To begin with, we're looking at the types of financial aid and where the money comes from. We'll look at the financial aid application that's used to determine eligibility for most financial aid, called the FAFSA. We'll look at some of the terminology that's used in the process to take away some of the mystery that may be hidden or the misconceptions about what each of those terms means. There are special circumstances that may apply to your family that you may want schools to know about when determining eligibility. It may be things like a change of income or high healthcare costs. We'll also talk a little bit about how that's submitted to the schools. And lastly, we'll look a little bit at scholarships. There are several types of financial aid, and the first we'll look at are those that are free, called gift assistance. The most common of those is the form of scholarship, which almost everyone has heard about. Scholarships, as you can probably guess, are merit-based financial aid based on a student's ability. It might be grades, it might be athletic prowess, it might be musical ability, things of that nature. The source of the money is usually the college, but can be states and private sources, a foundation, a nonprofit organization of some kind that has a vested interest or just an interest in helping students out. You see a list of some of the examples of scholarships there on the middle of the page. And the last one, CVS Caremark, is thrown in as an example of something our family benefited from. My wife works in Mount Prospect at CVS Caremark in their mail order facility, and she was able to, or our daughter, I should say, was able to apply for an employee scholarship and received $2,500 from that organization. Grants are another type of financial aid that you don't have to pay back. And somewhat unlike scholarships, grants are almost always based on need. When a family doesn't have all the resources to help pay for college. Grants can come from the college or university, but there are also state and federal grants that can make up a significant portion of a student's financial aid package. For most grants, the way to apply is with the FAFSA, the financial aid application I mentioned just a bit ago, and then we'll talk about it a few minutes later. The federal Pell Grant, the state of Illinois MAP grant or monetary award program, and grants from the college universities are common types of grants to see. In addition to financial aid that you don't have to pay back, there are some funds that are earned. Work study. A work study position is typically a part-time job on campus, although it might involve something off campus in a community service setting. It might be tutoring. It might be working in a library setting in some special project that serves the greater good. In most cases, work study is need-based, but there are colleges that offer non-need-based work study. Anyone who wants to may be able to find a job on campus. But again, that will vary from one college to the next. Students usually work anywhere from 5 to 15 hours a week. It might be that you find the schedule for working on campus is much more flexible than working off campus. If final exams are coming up and you're working for a local store in town, they might not be as willing to accommodate as a faculty member would on campus if you're working for that person. Payment for work study is usually made by check, but can be made electronically every couple of weeks or so. It might be once a week, but usually not more often, usually not less often rather than every 2 weeks. A third type of financial aid is aid that you repay, student loans. Loans can be made to the student or to the parent. First, we're going to look at the most common student loans, and they're called Stafford loans. The student's the borrower, and the money comes not from a bank, but from the federal government. You see here on the second line the interest rate. The current rate of 2.75% is an all-time low. I've been in financial aid since 1990, and it has never been lower than that. It once approached 3.5% several years ago, but as you see, last year the rate was 4.5%, 5% 2 years ago, and again about 4.5% 3 years ago. Each year the interest rate changes, but the rate for that loan never changes. So this year's freshman class would have a 2.75% rate that will never change. The sophomore year rate would be different, and that rate will never change once it is set. So a student could have 4 different loans for 4 academic years, each one of them having its own rate that does not change until the loan is paid off. Repayment for the loan starts 6 months after a student graduates or 6 months after they're no longer enrolled, at least half-time. The dollar amounts that you see here listed on the screen are the most or the maximum amounts that a student can get for each academic year. A loan can come in 2 types, a subsidized, which is need-based, or an unsubsidized, which is not need-based. With the subsidized loan, interest is not charged until the student stops being enrolled. So for the duration of 4 years of college, no interest is accumulating on that loan. When they graduate, then interest begins, and payment starts 6 months after that. You see that there are different amounts for the subsidized loan, $3,500 for a freshman, $4,500 for the sophomore, and $5,500 for junior and senior years. So the student can get that much from subsidized and a total of $5,500 to $7,500 in combined subsidized and unsubsidized loans. With the unsubsidized loan, because it is not based on need and can be given to anyone no matter what their income, interest is not paid while a student is in school. Otherwise, the similarities are great between the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. Payment starts 6 months after graduation. Student does not have to make any payment during school. Interest rates are the same for both loans. The only difference is that interest is not charged on the subsidized until the student leaves school. Another type of financial aid that's available for the student is a private loan. It's a non-federal loan made by most any lender that wants to. There are certainly dozens of lenders and credit unions that make the funding available. You see 3 of the more common lenders for our loans at Lake Forest. One of the differences with federal loans and non-federal loans is that with this private loan, the student can borrow as much as they need to cover all the cost of school that hasn't been met by any other financial aid. So you see this simple equation. Eligibility is the cost minus aid. If the student's cost of attendance is $30,000 and they receive $20,000 in grants, scholarships, and Stafford loans, work study, they can get $10,000 more in a non-federal loan, as much as they need to cover that full cost. Another difference I should say, with the non-federal loans is that the student has to have a cosigner. A credit-worthy cosigner will allow them to get a better interest rate. The better the credit, the lower the rate. Interest rates might be fixed or they might be variable. Check with the lender or their website and you'll see that there may be the option of choosing one or the other. Interest rate are set at the time the loan is given, and the interest is charged immediately once the student is in school and continues until the loan is fully paid off. Oftentimes, the interest and principal can be deferred until the student has left school, but it may begin immediately depending on options that are available by the individual lender. Outside of student loans, there are parent loans, and the most common is the Federal PLUS, or Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. Like the Stafford loan, the federal government makes the money available. And just like the Stafford loan has interest rates that are set by the government, the Federal PLUS also has a rate that is set. And you'll see that it's a fair amount higher at 5.5% this year. Last year, the rate was almost, well, a little bit more than 1.5 points higher at 7.6, and again, 7% 3 years ago rather. Like the unsubsidized loan, like the private loan we just talked about, the amount that a parent can get is the same as cost of school minus financial aid. So again, if there's $30,000 of cost and the student gets $20,000 of aid, the parent can apply for $10,000. If the cost is $50,000 and the student gets $30,000 of aid, the parent can get $20,000 from the PLUS loan. It is credit-based, but the interest rate is the same for all borrowers as long as they are approved, seeing this 5.3% for the current year. Payment of the loan usually begins right away, within 60 days of the loan being dispersed, but it can be deferred while the student is in school. Now we're going to look a little bit at the application process. We've talked about the types of financial aid that are available. Some are need-based and some are not need-based. But looking at the financial aid application called the FAFSA, we'll see how a student applies for any type of need-based financial aid. So again, the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's one application that virtually every college in the United States will use to apply for a student to apply for financial aid. It is need-based. Grants, loans, work study. The best way to complete the FAFSA is online at fafsa.ed.gov. It's also available in paper form in Spanish or in English, and you have the option of a call-in application if you're having significant issues with either of the other two. We strongly encourage you to use the FAFSA online. Much better. It's processed faster, about 3 days for the electronic version versus 2 or 3 weeks for the paper version. It has edits built into it so that if you leave a question blank that can't be blank, it will tell you. If some numbers are inconsistent, it will tell you. Much better to use the application online. To apply using the FAFSA, the student has to be a citizen or permanent resident of the United States. A valid Social Security number is needed. The parents do not have to be citizens and do not have to have a Social Security number for the student to complete the FAFSA. This application is done each and every year, and as you see at the bottom of the screen, the application for next fall, the fall of 2021, will be available in just a month, October 1st. That's the first day that you can complete the application for next academic year. Students who are enrolled in the fall of this year or the spring in 2021 would complete the 2021 FAFSA. We're talking though today about the 21-22 FAFSA. The FAFSA is an application that is completed by a student and at least one parent. The custodial parent, the parent that the student has lived with most in the last 12 months. So if parents are divorced and the student has lived with mom for, let's say, 7 months and lives with dad for about 5 months out of the year, the mother will complete the application with the student. If the mother has remarried, she would provide information about herself and her current spouse. There are about 100 questions on the FAFSA, but don't let that number intimidate you. Most of them can be answered in a very short period of time. The first are student questions: your first name, your middle initial, your last name, your date of birth, social, the year in school, when you graduated, will you have a high school degree, those kinds of things. There are questions about the schools that a student wants to attend. Name each college or university that you're planning to go to and that you want this information to be passed on to. How many people are in your family? How many in college? So again, many of these questions can be answered very quickly by the student. The section that gets into finances is the more detailed and time-consuming section, but can be quite quick to complete, as we'll talk about a little bit later. The FAFSA for the fall of 2021 is asking for 2019 income. For most families, they completed the tax return for 2019 back in April of this year. And so it'd be the case that for most families, this is already done. The FAFSA also asks about savings, checking, investment accounts. If you have a business or a farm that is not a family-owned business or a family farm, that net worth is reported. When we look at the FAFSA for this year and compare it with the one that was done for the, for next academic year and compare it with the one for the current year, there are very few differences except for line references on the tax return. The FAFSA for next spring and fall will ask about 2019 income. The FAFSA for the current academic year is asking about 2018 income. And so the tax return has changed in slight ways. And because of that, the FAFSA line references are different. The FAFSA creates something, or calculates something, I should say, called the EFC, the Estimated Expected Family Contribution. And it's important to know that this is not truly the amount that your family will need to pay for school. It's a measure of your family's financial strength. It is loosely considered what you can pay, but it's not the same as what you actually will need to pay out of pocket. The FAFSA determines eligibility for any need-based financial aid, as we've talked about several times. It may be used by some sources to help determine scholarship eligibility, but in large part it's just for grants, loans, and work study. The FAFSA can be sent to 10 colleges or universities. You don't need to do it 10 times and send it off to each of the different schools. Instead, you complete it once, list the name of the college or colleges, and the Federal Processing Center will then distribute the information to each school. If you're looking at 15 schools or 11 schools, you only have room for the first 10 on the application the first time around. But after the application has been processed, you can take one school off or 3 or 4 schools off and replace it then with 3 or 4 new schools, so that all 13 will have, or all 15 will have, access to the FAFSA. Here's a list of the kinds of things that you will need to complete the application. It begins with an FSA ID. FSA is Federal Student Aid. This ID number is made up of a username and a password. Student needs to have his own or her own username and password, and the parent needs to have his or her own FSA ID. If both parents are involved in the application process, both parents should have their own FSA IDs. You can apply for this in a process we'll look at a little bit more detail later on. Student needs to have his or her social security number, and it may be that you don't know that number, so you want to pull up the information to get that. Social security numbers are also reported for parents. If parents do not have a social, you still complete the FAFSA, but you enter zeros instead of a true social security number. You want to have information to show what income student and parents had in 2019. If you filed your tax return, you could have a copy of that return handy. We'll also talk about how you can draw in information from the IRS without having your tax return. but you want to have W-2s available to you or 1099s available as well. Reports that show, or yes, periodic reports that show the value of savings and checking, investment accounts, things of that nature will also be used. You see that you do not count the family home that you live in or the family farm or business. You want to know the colleges that you're considering, not just U of I, but University of Illinois, University of Indiana. It may be that some campuses have multiple branches, and so you want to know which specific branch you would be attending. Any school that you're applying to for admission, you should also know their name for this process of applying for financial aid. Next, you want to know financial aid deadlines. And is it an absolute deadline where if you miss it, you don't receive anything? Or is it a priority date where they encourage you to get it done by a certain date, but they will still accept applications afterward? For the state of Illinois, there is a deadline set each year to receive what's called a State of Illinois MAP grant, or Monetary Award Program grant. You see, it's a sizable award if you qualify, but you not only have to qualify, you also have to apply and meet the deadline. The deadline for next fall has not been set, but you see here the most recent 3 years and their deadlines. Our position at Lake Forest is get this done as soon as you can, and if you're an Illinois resident, target the 1st of January, just so that you're safe in knowing that your application is submitted early. There are several ways that you can get help with the FAFSA. In addition to online with the FAFSA when you're in the middle of the application, you can also get help from high school high school guidance offices, the College Career Planning Center, for example. I'll defer to the high school counselors at D214 schools to let you know if they are having any FAFSA completion nights or if they're doing something else this year because of the COVID restrictions. College and university financial aid offices can help, whether by phone or by email, or in some cases in person or remote help. We're available to guide you through the process or help you if you get stuck on a particular question. In addition, the state of Illinois has something called the ISAC Corps. The Illinois Student Assistance Commission has offices throughout the state, and they may, in fact, this year, I haven't heard, but may be holding some virtual or in-person sessions throughout the course of the fall. I'll defer to isac.org, that website, for information about what sessions they may have and when they're being held. But all of these options are available for no cost to you. Let's look now briefly at the FAFSA itself. When you go to fafsa.ed.gov, you'll see this homepage and several sections along the top that will help you in different stages of the process. But to actually get into the FAFSA for the very first time, you'll click on this link for Start Here as a new FAFSA user. After you've submitted the FAFSA, or once you have saved the FAFSA and you exit out, when you come back in the next time, you are a returning user, once you would log in there. Once you get into the FAFSA itself, you will identify yourself as either a student or a parent. If you're the student, you would enter your username and password as you see down here at the bottom. If you don't remember what that is, you can click on this link next to the horizontal arrow, and it will take you to a place where you can reestablish your password and your username. I should say it will identify your username and you can reset your password. If you're entering the FAFSA as a parent, you don't want to know and shouldn't know your student's username and password. So you would enter instead their name, their social security number and date of birth, and something called a save key. The save key is an additional layer of protection and a way for parents to access the FAFSA without knowing that confidential FSA ID. It's created here on this screen by the student, creating a save key and confirming it as you do in most web applications. Once that's known, the student makes a record of what the save key is, and mom or dad collects the save key and saves that as well. And then when the parent comes in, they can use the save key to pick up where the student left off. So for example, the student starts the application, creates the save key, goes in and enters name, date of birth, student income, student savings, the colleges that he or she is planning to go to, and then stops, saves the application, and exits. A day or two later, mom and dad come in and they identify the student by name and social, and then the save key, then they can pick up and begin with the parent sections of the FAFSA. Throughout the application, you'll see helps along the way. In the upper right, there's an example with a question mark. Throughout the application, if you are unsure, you can look for that question mark and you will get an expanded pop-up that gives you an idea of what it is that they're looking for. Each page will have a save tab, and you can save the application and exit out and come back later. Here's another example in the middle of the screen of how you can get help with the process. Now we're going to jump ahead to about the middle of the application, or the later half of the form, where it's asking about income for 2019. It'll begin by asking, have your parents already filed their tax return, or will they be filing? Again, here on the right-hand side, you see an example of where that question mark will help you by seeing the options for the answer to the question and the detail that they're asking for. In this case, the student, or the parent rather, has said, I have already completed the application, I've filed the 1040, and I've filed jointly. If you meet other characteristics that you will see when you're in the application yourself, and if you're eligible, you can link to the IRS, as you see here at the bottom of the screen circled in red. This is a great advantage for most families because it will go to the IRS site, look at your 2019 tax return, and pull in all the relevant answers from your return and dump it into the FAFSA. Strongly encourage you to use that if you can. Probably 80 to 90% of families can use it, but not everyone. It's going to reduce the number of errors that you make and improve the chances that your application goes through without any additional steps required. Now, to look again a little bit at the FSA ID that we've talked about, it's a unique username and password specific to each individual. Parents need to have their own, and if there are two parents involved, each of you has that. Applies for it through this website, fsaid.ed.gov. You do have to have a social to apply for the FSA ID. If you don't, you can't access the FAFSA electronically and sign it electronically. You want to save your FSA ID in a safe place where only you know where to find it. There are challenge questions like there are with many secure type access issues on the internet. Challenge questions that you want to make sure that you make a note of. If it's your favorite color, well, sometimes that changes over a person's lifetime. And this FSA ID can be used from now until the time a loan is paid off 10 years from now. So we do encourage you to choose challenge questions that you are going to easily know the answer for and won't forget. Here is a screenshot to show you what the homepage of the FSA ID looks like. In the top left or near that, you can create the ID, or you can manage the FSA ID if you need to be reminded of what your username is, or if you want to reset your password. If you think that your password has been compromised, you can do that. You can also link your phone number or your email address to the FSA ID. So that you forget what your text is, what your ID is, you can send it, you can get a text message and speed things up to reset that password if you need to. For some families, there are other forms that are needed in the financial aid process. Verification is a process where you have to confirm values that are on the FAFSA, confirm how many people are in the family, how many people are in college. But this is done for only about 1/3 of all applicants nationwide. And with that in mind, most of you won't have to do that. And it's not a tedious process. It just has to be completed to receive an official offer of financial aid. In most cases, it is just a random selection, but occasionally it's because an answer is inconsistent. You might not have used the IRS data retrieval tool, and so you entered your own tax paid and total income. Maybe you said your total income was 60,000 and your tax paid was 30,000. Those numbers are unlikely to be accurate together, so you might be selected for verification and you're asked to prove what your income and tax paid was. For other families, other forms are needed. If your school, college, university requires something else as a supplement to the FAFSA, you want to ask them about that, the deadline for submitting it, and to get that in. For other colleges, a few of them in the country, they use something called the College Scholarship Profile, or CSS profile, which collects quite a few extra questions about family income for more than 1 year, the prior year and the year forward. It'll also ask about healthcare expenses or educational costs for other family members. For some families, the FAFSA is not a good measure of, or a good way to measure their financial strength. Maybe in 2019 you had 2 jobs, or because of COVID, you're now working much less than you were in 2019. Changes of income, healthcare costs, educational expenses that you may be paying for other family members, parents paying back their own student loans. Those are some kinds of things that you could report uniquely to the college financial aid office with a special letter or a form that the college asks you to complete. As we look now at the next part of financial aid, how do we determine financial need? We mentioned at the very early part of the presentation that need-based aid can include grants, loans, and work study. Well, what is need? Need is when the family's resources are less than what the college costs. And so we compare those two with this equation: cost of attendance minus the estimated EFC equals your financial need. As you can imagine then, when the costs are different, your financial need will be different. The cost can be broken down into direct cost, tuition, fees, housing, and meals, which would be the things that appear on your bill. Room and board is a term used for housing and meals together, but those are direct costs. Other costs that should be expected and planned for are books, personal expenses, and travel. They're all part of the cost of attendance that a school will use when determining what your financial need is. We're going to look at a situation where a family of 5, mom and dad, and 3 kids. One of those kids will be in college in the fall. The household income is about $60,000, and they have a modest amount in savings and checking accounts. In this example, it's a very generalized case, but their EFC would be about $5,000. Compare that with a cost of 3 different colleges, a private school, a state university, and a community college, and you see they have significantly different levels of financial need. This is one of the reasons that it's important to wait until you've received an award letter from each school before saying, I can't afford that. There's no reason to look any further. Instead, wait to receive the award letter from the school. And here are some examples of awards for a family with an EFC of 5,000 to show you how much difference there can be between colleges with different costs and colleges with different levels of need. So here you see significantly more grant money being provided. This is for a typical student, not some great student athlete or great scholar. At Lake Forest, we have a current initiative where if a student who is an Illinois resident applies in time to meet the deadline for the State of Illinois MAP grant, and they receive the Pell Grant as well, they'll get all of their tuition covered by grant and scholarship funds. You see other state university and college, community college costs and their level of aid as well. So again, it helps to make sure that you've received the award letter before you make any commitment to say this college is or isn't affordable. The award letter itself that gives you the detail we just looked at is provided only after a student has been admitted to the college. Typically in the fall, between November and as late as April or May, you'll receive an award letter that might come by mail. It might come through email or a student portal through a website that the school gives student access to. It might be multiple methods, but check with the college financial aid office and it can tell you how that will happen. Here's an example of an award letter from Lake Forest. Like the numbers that we looked at a minute ago or so, you see that the financial aid is listed in the middle with grants and scholarships in our award letter listed first, student loans listed at the bottom. And at the very outset, we say this is based on you living on campus, and a breakdown of the costs will be available from this link and a simple summary of the cost right there. The method that students receive award letters and the format of award letters can vary quite a bit from college to university and among colleges and universities rather, but they'll see a similar format in general to this type of breakdown. Before a student has been admitted to a college, you might still want to know, what financial aid might I expect? And while this is not to take the place of an award letter, is not an official offer from the college, most colleges in the country will have something on their website called a net price calculator. With it, you can provide information about your family, amount of income, number in the family, number in college, assets, things along that line. And from that information, the college will look at its typical student or average student in that scenario and provide an estimate of how much financial aid you could receive. Again, it's not an official offer, but gives you a ballpark idea of eligibility. If we take a break now and look at scholarship funds, again, these are not necessarily based on financial need, but it's helpful to know that there are other scholarships out there above and beyond what a college may offer as part of its financial aid award letter. I encourage students who are seniors to take some time now to begin the search process. Look online, check with your college career planning center at high school, and ask about scholarship funds that may be available for students who meet your profile. Students, mark a calendar and identify when's the due date. I have to have my letter of recommendation ready, so I'm going to ask my teacher or guidance counselor a month ahead of time or 3 weeks ahead of time. I need to write an essay, so I'm going to allow myself a week to do that. And I'm going to do it 2 weeks before it's due in case anything comes up. You don't want to push things to the last minute. You'll notice that each scholarship provider has its own set of requirements. So look to see, is there an essay? Is there a transcript needed? Do I need to have a letter of recommendation, 2 letters, that kind of thing. While scholarships are not based on financial need, they do apply toward any need that a student has. And so you want to make sure that you know ahead of time that a scholarship could replace a loan or could replace work study that you have been offered in the past. I think it's also helpful to keep in mind that every little bit helps. Whether it's a scholarship of $500 or $10,000, it's less that you have to come up with out of pocket. It's less that you have to earn from a summer job or a job part-time during the school year. A $500 scholarship, for example, might cover all your books for a whole semester. Or if you're renting books, it might cover the whole cost for the year. No scholarship is too small. There are lots of different ways to find scholarships, and here are just a few of them that we would recommend. Naviance is something that each high school guidance office will have available to you online. It's going to ask questions that will help identify scholarships on a national, state, and even a local level. So there may be something unique to a student from Buffalo Grove or Hersey High School or other schools nearby based on answers that you provide on Naviance. FastWeb is a very large national database. Hispanic Scholarship Foundation becomes available the first of the year and has a number of scholarship sources with a single application for students of Hispanic heritage. A little word of warning on this last line. If you see that an application requires a $10 fee, or if they say that 90% of all applicants are offered a scholarship, you may want to be careful about that particular source. It may sound too good to be true, and it may be a bit of a scam where they're collecting information about you that's going to be used in a fraudulent way, or it may be they're trying to get money from you just to make the appearance of doing good when in fact they're pocketing the money themselves. A few other sources of financial aid that you may find helpful from the state of Illinois, from the federal government, and also check with your, as parents, your employer's human resources office or similar office where they might be able to tell you if scholarship, grant, or interest-free loans are available for students. Outside of everything we've talked about so far, there is an initiative from the state of Illinois that began just over a year ago with something called the RISE Act. It began to be in use for this academic year and will continue for next year. Under the RISE Act, undocumented students and some transgender students are able to receive need-based aid from the state without being able to complete the FAFSA. You don't have to have a social security number. Parents and students don't need to have socials, but they need to apply through isac.org, isac.org. You'll find lots of details about the RISE Act and the funds that you can receive by going there. A couple things to keep in mind as we close out this session for tonight. Keep aware of all the deadlines for college scholarships, college applications for admission, the FAFSA deadlines at each college or university. Make sure you meet those. If you're applying to private scholarships, know those deadlines so that you're not late. And finally, if you're thinking about a college and cost is going to be a factor in your decision, make sure that you've waited until you've received the award letter, made any special appeals based on special circumstances that you may have, anything of that nature. Get the award letter in hand from the school and then compare it with the other colleges before you decide whether or not a college is affordable. Complete the process, wait for the award letter, compare the award letters, then make your decision. Many times we find that even at Lake Forest, where our cost is in excess of $60,000 for a year, families are surprised that they can afford it. It may not always be the case, but wait for those award letters to come, then make your decision. That's the end of the formal presentation for today, and I hope that you found it helpful. If you finish up and you have questions about something we've talked about today, I'd invite you to give me an email with the question details, maybe a daytime phone number that I can reach you if you need to speak. But if you want to do that, please list D214 as part of the subject line, and then it'll be easier for me to find that later on if need be. Sometimes messages go to my spam folder and I can see that quickly and know that I should be responding to that. I hope that you found today's information session helpful. I encourage you to contact the D214 high school offices if you've got other questions about Naviance, about FAFSA completion nights that your school may host, other things along that line. Wish you well in the financial aid process, the college admissions process, the whole college search, and hope that a year from now, your students are enrolled at a school and payments are manageable for you, at least in part because of today's information. Goodbye for now.